There's little equity in the Lord's gifts. That's so. Look around you. Study the judge. Oh, mayhaps he ain't to your liking, fair enough. The man's a hand at anything. I've never seen him turn to a task what he didn't prove clever at it. He speaks Dutch. Oh, he does, for I heard him do it. We cut a parcel of crazy pilgrims down off the Lano, and the old man in the lead of them, he spoke right up in Dutch like we was all of us in Dutchland. Judge gave it to him right back. Well, Glanton come near falling off his horse. We none of us knew him to speak it. Asked where he learned it. You know what he said? Said off a Dutchman. Hell, I couldn't have learned it off 10 Dutchmen. No. You see, the gifts of the Almighty are weighed, parceled out in a scale peculiar to himself. Oh, it's no fair accounting. I don't doubt, but he'd be the first to admit it. You put the query to him bold-face. The Almighty. And that great hairless thing? Oh, you wouldn't think to look at him he could outdance the devil himself now, would ye? God, the man is a dancer. You will not take that away from him. On fiddle. Well, he's the greatest fiddler I ever heard, and that's an end on it, the greatest. He can cut a trail, shoot a rifle, ride a horse, track a deer. Oh, he's been all over the world. Well, him and the governor, they sat up till breakfast, and it was Paris this and London that in 5 languages. You'd give something to have heard them. Governor, he's a learned man himself, he is. But the judge. Oh? Why, it may be the Lord's way, showing how little store he sets by the learning. Or whatever could it mean to one who knows all? He's an uncommon love for the common man. And godly wisdom resides in the least of things. So that may well be that the voice of the Almighty speaks most profoundly in such beings as lives in silence themselves. For let it go how it will, God speaks in the least of creatures. No man is give leave of that voice. Oh, when it stops, you'll know you've heard it all your life. Why, at night, when the company's asleep and the horses are grazing, who hears them grazing? No one. But if they cease their grazing, who is it that wakes? Every man. You know, every man in this company claims to have encountered that sooty-souled rascal in some other place. He saved us all. I have to give him that. We come down off the little Colorado. We didn't have a pound of powder in the company. Oh, pound. We not a dram, hardly. And there he sat, on a rock in the middle of the greatest desert you'd ever want to see. Just perched on this rock like a man waiting for a coach. Brown thought him a mirage. Might have shot him for one if we'd had aught to shoot him with, but we'd shot it all up with the savages. Holed up 9 days in a cave. Lost most of the horses. We were 38 men when we left Chihuahua City, and we were 14 when the judge found us, mortally whipped, on the run. Every man jack of us knew that in that godforsaken land somewhere was a draw, or cul-de-sac, or perhaps just a little pile of rocks. There we'd be driven to stand with those empty guns. The judge. Give the devil his due. We'd been on the plain all night, well into the next day. The Delawares kept calling halts and dropping to the ground to give a listen. There was nowhere to run, no place to hide. I don't know what they wanted to hear. We knew the bloody niggers was out there, and speaking for myself, that was an abundance of information. I didn't need more. That sunrise, we looked to be our last. We were all watching the backtrack. I don't know how far you could see. 15, maybe 20 miles. But then, about the meridian of that day, we come upon the judge there on his rock in that wilderness, by his single self. Aye, and there was no rock, just the one. Well, Irving said he brung it with him. I said that it was a mere stone for to mark him out of nothing at all. But he had with him that self-same rifle you see with him now, all mounted in German silver. Oh, the name he give it. Set in silver wire under the check piece in Latin. Et in Arcadia ego, reference to the lethal in it. Now, common enough for a man to name his gun. I've heard of Sweet Lips and Hark from the Tombs and every sort of lady's name. But his is the first and only I ever seen with an inscription from the classics. And there sat he, well, no horse, just him with his legs crossed, smiling as we rode up. Well, like he'd been expecting us. Well, he had an old canvas kit bag and an old woolen Benjamin over the one shoulder. In that bag was a brace of pistols and a good assortment of specie, gold and silver. But he didn't even have a canteen. It was like, well, you couldn't tell where he'd come from. He said he'd been with a wagon company and fell out to go it alone. Davy wanted to leave him there. Well, it didn't sit well with his honor. Don't to this day. And Glanton just studied him. It was a day's work to even guess what he made of that figure on that ground. I don't know to this day. They have a secret commerce, some terrible covenant. You mind, you'll see that I'm right. Well, he called for the last of 2 pack animals we had. We cut the straps, left the wallets to lay where they fell, and the judge mounted up. He and Glanton rode side by side, and soon they was conversing like brothers. The judge sat that animal bareback like an Indian and rode with his grip and his rifle perched on the withers and looked all about himself with the greatest satisfaction in the world. As if everything turned out just as he planned and the day could not have been finer. Well, we'd not rode far before he altered our course about 9 points to the east. He pointed out a range of mountains about 30 miles distant. We pulled for those mountains and none of us asked why. By then, Glanton had given the particulars of the situation in which he'd installed himself, but if being naked of arms in that wilderness and half all Apacheria in pursuit worried him a bit, he kept it to himself entire. Now, what do you reckon was in those mountains we set out for? How'd he come to know about it? Well, how to find it? How to put it to use? How indeed? We reached the foothills come early evening, rode up to dry arroyo and pushed on, well, I guess till midnight, made camp. Neither wood nor water. Come morning, you could see them on the plain to the north. They were riding 4 and 6 abreast, and there was no short supply of them, and they were in no hurry. The judge had been up all night by what the vedette said, watching the bats. Well, he'd go up the side of the mountain, make notes in a little book, and then come back down. Could not have been more cheerful. Well, 2 men had deserted us in the night. That made us down to 12, and the judge 13. I gave him my best study, then and now. Well, he appeared to be a lunatic, but then not. Glanton I always knew was mad. Well, we left out at first light up a little wooded draw. We were on the north slope of the mountain, so there was willer and alder and cherry growing out of the rocks. Just little trees, but the judge would stop to botanize and then ride to catch up. My hand to God, pressing leaves into his book. Sure, I never seen anything like it, and all the while the savages down there on the plain riding that pan. God, I put a crick in my neck. I couldn't keep my eyes off them, and they were 100 souls if they were one. But we come out on a flinty ground where it was all junipers. We just rode on, no attempt to put their trackers at fault. We rode all day like that. We saw the savages no more, for they come under the lee of the mountain and were somewhere on the slopes below us. But as soon as it was dark and the bats was about the judge, he altered our course again, riding along, holding on to his hat, looking up at the little animals. Well, we got all broke up and scattered in the junipers. So we halted to regroup and recruit the horses. We just sat around in the dark. No one spoke a word.
When the judge got back, he and Glanton whispered among themselves, and we moved on again. We led the horses in the dark. There was no trail, just steep, scrabbly rock. And when we reached the cave, some of the men thought he meant for us to hide there, or that he was, for a fact, daft altogether. But it was the nighter. The nighter, you see. We left all that we owned at the mouth of that cave and filled our wallets and panniers and mochillas with the cave dirt and left out come daybreak. When we topped the rise above that place and looked back, there was a great spout of bats being sucked down in that cave. Thousands of creatures. And they continued so for an hour or more, and even then it was that we could no longer see them. With the judge, we left him at a high pass. Little Clearwater Creek, him and the Delawares. He instructed us to circle the mountain and come back to that place in 48 hours, so we unloaded all the containers on the ground, took the 2 horses with us, and him and the Delawares commenced lugging them wallets and panniers up the Little Creek. I watched him go, and I said, I would never set eyes on that man again. Well, never in this world. I thought Glanton would leave him, but we went on. And the next day, on the far side of that mountain, we encountered those 2 lads who deserted us, hanging upside down in a tree. They'd been skinned. I can tell you, it does very little for a man's appearance. But if the savages had not guessed it, now they knew for sure that we'd none of us any gunpowder. Well, we would not ride the animals. Just lead them, keep them off the rocks, and hold their noses if they snuffled. But in those 2 days, the judge leached out the guano with creek water and wood ash, precipitated it out. He built a little clay kiln and burned charcoal in it, doused that fire by day and fired it again come dark. When we found him and the Delawares was sitting in the creek stark naked. They appeared at first to be drunk, but on what none could surmise. The entire top of that mountain covered in Apache Indians, and there sat he. Well, he got up when he seen us, went to the Willers, and come back with a pair of wallets. One of them was about 8 pounds of pure crystal saltpeter, and in the other about 3 pounds of fine alder charcoal. He had ground the charcoal to a powder in the hollow of a rock. My God, you could have made ink out of it. We lashed the bag shut, slung him over the pommel of Glanton's saddle, and him and the Indians went and got their clothes. I was glad for it. I've never seen a grown man without a single hair on his body. And him weighing 24 stone, which he did then, does now, and by my own warrant, for I added up the counters on the bar with my own and sober eyes at a stock scale in Chihuahua City that same month and year. Well, we just rode straight down the mountain. No scouts, nothing. Just straight out. We were dead for sleep. It was dark when we reached the plain, so we grouped, took a head count, and moved on again. The moon was about 3/4 full, waxing. We were like circus riders. Not a sound. Them horses on eggshells. Well, we'd no way of knowing where the savages was. Last clue we had of their vicinity was them poor buggers flaying a tree. So we just set out dead west across the desert. Doc Irving was before me, and it was that bright I could count the hairs on his head. We rode all night. And toward morning, just as the moon was down, we come upon a band of wolves. Well, they scattered, come back. Not a sound out of them, no more than smoke. Well, they'd drift off and quarter around, circle the horses, bold as brass. We cut at them with our hobbles, but they just slipped past. You couldn't hear them on the hard pan, just their breath. Or they'd mutter and grouse and pop their teeth. Glanton halted. The thing swirled around, slank off, come back again. So 2 of the Delawares backtracked off to the left a bit, braver souls than me. And sure they found the kill. It was a young buck antelope killed the evening before. It was about half consumed. We set into it with our knives, took the rest of the meat with us, ate it raw in the saddle, froze for it. It was the first meat we'd seen in 6 days. Foraged on the mountain for pinion nuts like bears. I'm glad to get them. Well, we lift little more than bones for the Lobos. But I would not shoot a wolf. And I know other men of the same sentiment. And in all this time, Judge hardly spoke a word. So at dawn, we come upon the edge of a vast Malpais, and Your Honor takes up a position on some lava rocks there, commences to give us a address. What was like a sermon, but no such sermon as any man of us had ever heard before. Beyond the Malpais was a volcanic peak, and in the sunrise it was many colors. There was dark little birds crossing down the wind. The wind was flapping his Judge's old benchman about him, and he pointed up at that stark and solitary mountain, delivered of himself an oration to what end I know not, then or now. But he concluded with it telling us of our mother. The earth was round like an egg, and contained all good things within her. And then he turned and led that horse he'd been riding over that terrain of black and glassy slag, treacherous to man and beast alike, and we followed on behind him like the disciples of a new faith. The Malpais is a maze. You come out on a little promontory and be balked about by the steep crevasses. You wouldn't dare to jump them. Sharp black glass the edges and sharp flinty rocks below. We led the horses with every care. Still they was bleeding about their hooves. Our boots was cut to pieces clambering over those old caves and rippled plates. You could see well enough how things had gone in that place. Rocks melted, set up again, all wrinkled like pudding. The earth stove through to the molten core of her. Now, wherefore aught any man knows lies the locality of hell. For the earth is a globe in the void, in truth there's no up or down to it. But there's men in this company, besides myself, seen little cloven hoof prints in the stone. Clever as a doe in her going. But what doe ever trod melted rock? Now, I would not go beyond Scripture. But it may be there has been sinners so notorious evil that the fires coughed them up again. And I could well see how in the long ago those little devils with their pitchforks had crossed that fiery vomit for to salvage back them souls that had by misadventure been spewed up from their damnation onto the outer shelves of the world. It's a notion, no more. But someplace in the scheme of things, this world must touch the other. Won't something put them little hooflet markings in the lava flow, for I seen them there myself. The Judge, he seemed not to take his eyes from that dead cone where it rose off the desert like a great shanker. We followed solemn as owls, so that he turned back to look, and he did laugh when he seen our faces. With the foot of the mountain, we drew lots. Sent 2 men to go on with the horses. I watched them go, and one of them was at this fire here tonight, and I watched him lead them horses away over the slag lands like a doomed man. Well, we're not doomed ourselves, I don't reckon, for when I looked up, he was already upon the slope, hand and foot, the Judge was, with his bag over his shoulder and his rifle for alpenstock. And so did we all go. Not halfway up, you could already see the savages down there on the plain, but we climbed on. I thought at worst we'd throw ourselves into that cauldron rather than be taken by those fiends. Well, I reckon it was about midday when we reached the top. We were done in. Savages not 10 miles out, I looked at the men about me, and sure they didn't look much. Dignity had gone out of them. They were good hearts all, then and now. And I did not like to see them so, and I felt the Judge had been sent among us for a curse. But he proved me wrong. But the time he did. I'm in 2 minds again now. But he was the first to the rim of the cone for all the size of him, and he stood gazing about like he'd come for the view. And then he sat down and began to scale at the rock with his knife. One by one we straggled up, and he sat with his back to that gaping hole, chipping away, and he cried out for us to do the same. It was brimstone. A wheel of brimstone all about the rim of that cauldron, bright yellow and shining here and there with the little flakes of silica, but most pure flowers of sulfur. We chipped it loose and chopped it fine with our knives until we had about 2 pounds of it. The judge took the wallets to a little cup place in the rock. He dumped out the charcoal and the niter, stirred them about with his hand, and then poured the sulfur in. I didn't know what, we'd be required to bleed into it like Freemasons, but it was not so. He worked the mixture up dry with his hands, and all the while the savages down there on the plain drawing nigh to us, and when I looked back, he was standing, the great hairless oaf, and he took out his pizzle, and he was pissing into the mixture, pissing with a great vengeance, and one hand aloft, and he cried out for us to do likewise. We're all half mad anyways, all lined up, Delawares and all, every man save Glanton, and he was a study. Well, we hauled forth our members, and at it we went. The judge was on his knees, kneading the mass with his naked arms, and the piss was splashing about. And he cried out for us to piss, man, piss for your very souls. For can't you see them savages yonder, and laughing all the while, and working up this great mass into a foul black dough, a devil's batter by the stink of it, and him not a bloody dark pastry man himself, I don't suppose. For he then draws his knife, commences to trowel it across the south-facing rocks, spreading it out thin with his knife blade, and watching the sun with one eye, and him smeared with blacking, and reeking of piss and sulfur, and grinning, and wielding that knife blade with a dexterity was wondrous. Well, like he did it every day of his life. And when he finished, he wiped his hands on his chest, and he sat back, and he watched the savages. And did we all. They were on the Malpais by then. They had a tracker who followed us every step of that naked rock, falling back at each blind head and calling out to the others. I don't know what he followed. Scent, perhaps? But soon we could hear them talking down there. And then they seen us. Well, God in His glory knows what they thought. They were all spread out across the lava. One of them pointed, and they all looked up. Thunderstruck, no doubt, to see 11 men perched on the topmost rim of that scalded atoll like misflown birds. They parleyed, and we watched would they dispatch any of their number after the horses, but they did not. Their greed overcame all else, and they started out for the base of the cone, scrambling over the lava for to see who would be the first. We had, I would suppose, an hour. So we watched the savages. We watched the judge's foul matrix drawn on them rocks. And we watched a cloud that was making for the sun. Well, one by one we give up watching the rocks or the savages, either one, for that cloud did look to be dead set for the sun and would have took the better part of an hour to have crossed it. That was the last hour we had. The judge was making notes in his little book, and he seen that cloud same as every other man, so he put down his book and watched it. And did we all? No one spoke. There was none to curse, none to pray. We just watched. And that cloud just cut the corner of the sun and passed on, and no shadow fell upon us. Well, the judge just picked up his ledger and carried on with his entries as before, and I watched him. Then I scrambled down to test a patch of his stuff with my hands. There was heat coming off it. I walked along the edge of the rim, and there was savages ascending by every quarter, for there was no route to favor on that bald and gravel slope. I looked about me for a rock of any size to send down, but there was none there larger than your fist, all just fine gravel and plates of scrag. Well, I looked at Glanton, and he was watching the judge, and he appeared to have his wits stolen. So the judge closes up his book, takes out his leather shirt, and spreads it out in a little cup place in the rock, calls out for us to bring him the stuff. Well, every knife was out. We went to scraping it up and him cautioning us not to strike fire on them flints. We heaped it up into the shirt, and the judge commenced to chop and grind it with his knife, and then he calls out, "Captain Glanton!" Captain Glanton, would you believe? "Captain Glanton, come charge that swivel bore of yours and see what manner of a thing we have here." So Glanton come up with his rifle, scooped his charger full, charged both barrels, patched 2 balls, drove them home, capped the piece, and made a step to the edge of the rim. But that was never the judge's way. "Down the maw, that thing," he says. And Glanton never questioned it. He went down the pitch of the inner rim to where lay the terminus of that terrible flue, held his piece out over it, pointed it straight down, cocked the hammer, and fired. You wouldn't hear sound like it in a long day's ride. God, give me the fidgets. He fired off both barrels, looked back at us, looked at the judge's wave, went on with his grinding, and then he called us all about him to fill up our horns and our flasks, and we did. One by one, circling past him like communicants. And when all had shared, he filled up his own flask, got out his pistols, and saw to the priming. The foremost of the savages was not more than a furlong on the slope. We were ready to lay into them, but again the judge would not have it. He fired off his pistols down into the cauldron, spacing out the shots. He fired off all 10 chambers, and then he cautioned us back from sight while he reloaded the pieces. Now all this gunfire gave the savages pause, no doubt, for they very likely reckoned us to be without powder altogether. So the judge, he steps up to the edge of the rim, and he had with him a good white linen shirt from out of his bag, and he waves it at the redskins and calls out to them in Spanish. Oh my God, it would have brought tears to your eyes. "All dead save me," he cried. "Have mercy on me. Todos muertos, todos." Waving that flag, God, it sent them yapping on the slopes like dogs. And then he turns to us, the judge does, with that smile of his, and he says, "Gentlemen," that was all he said. He had his pistols stuck in his belt at the back, and he drew them one in each hand, and he is as either-handed as a spider. He can write with both hands at a time, and I've seen him to do it. And he commenced to kill Indians. Well, we needed no second invitation. My God, it was a butchery. At the first fire, we killed a round dozen, and we did not let up. By the time the last poor nigger reached the bottom of the slopes, there was 58 of them lay slaughtered among the gravels. They just slid down the slope like chaff down a hopper. Some turned this way and some that. They made a chain about the base of the mountain. We rested our rifle barrels on the brimstone, shot 9 more on the lava where they ran. It was a stand, what it was. Wagers was laid. Last of them killed was a reckonable part of a mile from the muzzles of the guns, and them on a dead run. It was sharp shooting all around, and not one misfire in the batch with that queer powder. And that was the judge. First time I ever saw him. He's the thing to study. And what's he a judge of? What's he a judge of? Ah, lads, hush now. The man will hear ye. He's ears like a fox.